What is going on in the overemployed army? So today let's run through a DevOps roadmap that you can follow to become overemployed. As there are many high-paying remote positions in DevOps, a lot of them have great potential for overemployment because things like lack of meetings, right? They're not super meeting heavy and they're very high paying. So DevOps is the combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that increases your company's ability to deliver applications and products at higher speeds. You're basically improving and evolving much better compared to using traditional software development practices. So this speed enables your company to serve your customers better and also essentially compete more effectively in the tech market. And this video is actually based off a great article written by a DevOps author, and I'll link that article down in the description below. So if you want to check that out, you can check that out. So DevOps basically fuses development and operations, hence the name DevOps, and it puts it all in one group. And DevOps doesn't exactly mean that it's always going to be a separate team or a title, but sometimes it even means a software engineer that follows DevOps principles. And it's the idea of sharing the pain and the responsibility, or the rewards, the pleasure, from creating, deploying, and generating revenue from customer-facing software. Okay, so now we know what DevOps is. Let's actually talk about what you need to learn to become a DevOps engineer now. And let's start with the foundational things, right? So what is the foundation? So you'll usually start off with kind of learning Linux, right? So you don't have to become a Linux master or a wizard, but learning the basics of how to navigate a terminal, maybe get into servers and try to start up some processes, right? Write some shell scripts, things like that. That's a great start, and you don't have to become an expert right away. Linux is something that will take you years to learn anyways. From there, you usually go on to a programming language. Now, Python is an amazing programming language for getting into DevOps, and not only because it's great for DevOps, because it's simple and quick, and you don't need to have a lot of startup time investment to learn it and to run Python code, but it's also great because it's used in a lot of backend applications as well as AI and machine learning. So even if something goes wrong with your DevOps career and you eventually want to switch out, you can always make use of that investment that you spent learning Python. And then from things like Python, you can also go into Golang. Golang is also a great programming language, which is a little faster than Python, and it's used also a lot in DevOps, but it's a little trickier to learn. So that's why you usually start with Python first. So what else do you learn? You also need to learn cloud platforms. So things like AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. Usually AWS is the most common one because it's used the most by most companies around the world, and they have a plethora of tools. There's a lot of tools on AWS and a lot of things you can use that will benefit your company. And it's actually great because AWS even offers a lot of free training and courses on how to learn their tools and products. So if you not want to become just a DevOps engineer, but you also want to double your income by becoming overemployed, check out the Overemployed Masterclass linked in the description below and pinned comment. In there, we actually teach you how to become and stay overemployed with over 2 hours of detailed video modules. So back to DevOps. We're also going to be talking about, with this image on the screen, about the whole pipeline. So there's a lot that goes into creating code products that you might not think about, right? So things like provisioning infrastructure. So you have multiple environments, right? Things like staging, production, where your customers actually get the code. And then things like versioning, right? It might seem simple if you're working at one team in one company, but if there's a lot of code changes being pushed out and features being made, versioning can get pretty complex, right? So you have to stay on top of that, because if something goes wrong, you want to be able to always revert back to a working version. And that's where you use things like GitHub and GitLab to ensure versions are correct. And things like packaging, right? So how are you going to package your applications? Is it going to run in a Docker container? Is it going to run on a EC2 instance on AWS as a virtual machine server? Maybe even Lambda on AWS, right? You have a lot of options, and packaging is something that you can get creative with. And then you have your deployment. So things like Spinnaker, Jenkins, GitHub, GitLab are all possible tools that you can use for deployments, right? And you deploy all of these on some type of cloud platform usually. And then running them, right? So actually running the code, things like ECS, Kubernetes. You have a lot of options here in DevOps, and that's kind of why a lot of people love it, because you can get very creative with it and the learning never stops. And then from there, once everything is running, you want to observe, right? You want to make sure everything's working the way it should be. So things like looking at logs, monitoring metrics, if things go wrong, making sure you get notified or your development team gets notified so they can put out a fix quickly. So to get more into detail with Linux, Linux is basically where everything runs. Now, can you be great at DevOps and just stay in Microsoft and Windows? You can, but most companies will use some form of Linux, at least in some of their products. And it's usually actually the most common thing they use compared to Windows. Now, you don't need to become an expert, like I mentioned before, right? And it's something that's going to take you years to learn. But if you even just start off with simple tutorials, kind of playing around with Linux, and one of the best ways to actually learn Linux is just to install it, right? Maybe download something or install something like Ubuntu, and then you can kind of just play around with that. You'll break things, you'll fix things, and you'll just try new things, and you'll learn, right? That's kind of how you learn and absorb the best, just by doing. Now, you also want to learn Python, and to get into more detail with Python, it's pretty easy to actually find a lot of tutorials on this, right? If you go on YouTube, you can just search a Python crash course or tutorial. If you guys want, we can even release one, but basically Python's a great language because it's so easy to learn for beginners. And then for something like AWS, again, there's so many free courses out there, especially from even Amazon themselves. And you kind of need this to actually get into DevOps, right? Because if you don't know any cloud platform, and especially don't know AWS, you're kind of going to be lacking that on your resume, because a lot of people will know that because it's very important. And there's a lot of features on there. So don't expect to learn everything available on Amazon Web Services, but you need to learn at least some of the basics, like things like EC2, IAM for roles and authentications, things like that, S3 for storage, CloudWatch, VPC, security groups, all of these things, right? So these are very important, and every company will use some form of these. So you don't need to do too much, right? So let's say you work for maybe an hour a day, or even less, maybe 20 minutes a day, and you do this for a month or two, right? You'll learn a lot. And there's also a lot to learn in terms of just principles, right? So it's not just about the tech skills, it's about the mindset, the idea of being a DevOps engineer, right? So learning things like the CI/CD pipeline, which is continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment. Basically taking code that gets pushed to a code repo, right? Whether GitHub or GitLab, and maybe that triggers some type of pipeline, right? And that pipeline will do things like build your code, and then from there, test the code. And actually in DevOps, you don't always write the test yourselves. It's usually actually written by the software developers themselves. And then those tests, things like unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, will determine if the build is good and passing. And if those tests pass, then maybe you can go on to things like smoke tests, or even finally deploying the code after infrastructure is provisioned. So let's say you have a staging environment first, the code will first be deployed there. If everything looks good, maybe it'll automatically get triggered to get deployed into the production environment. And the production environment is where real customers will use their real data as the actual product, right? That's where real customers are. And once you learn all those principles and ideas, you'll find that everything kind of clicks more, right? So you can't just learn the tools without learning the philosophy behind what you're doing. So there's a lot to learn here, and it can be intimidating, but if you start slowly, you'll kind of pick up quickly, and it's a great opportunity to learn. So if you like the video, remember, like the video, and if you have any comments about DevOps, or if you like DevOps, or if you just want to get into DevOps, leave a comment down below. And if you guys like these type of crash course videos, leave a comment down below as well. We can make more for other fields as well. So remember to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you guys next time.